There we are. We're live. It's Sunday, October 7th, 2012. Live from Austin, Texas. This is the Atheist Experience. I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is Don Baker.
Hey, good to be here.
How are you?
Good.
We got a couple of bits of stuff to get out of the way, and then I'm going to turn it over to Don to explain. They don't believe that.
They don't believe that?
They don't believe that. For those who watch the show regularly, we're a live public access show from Austin, Texas on cable TV. But last week we did a show streaming from the studio that we're putting together in our new building. But one of the questions that we had that we have no way of actually getting good information on is this. How many of you are watching the show in Austin on cable as the only way that you can get the show? I mean,
yeah, it's a blind spot for us. We have no statistics on that.
Nobody tracks how many people are watching on cable. But so if you're in Austin and you watch the show on cable, don't bother calling in because you're probably not going to get through. The phone lines are already lit up. But you can send an email to tv@atheist-community.org and let us know that you're one of the cable viewers and that you have been for years and that you love us unconditionally and would really hate to see anything bad happen to us.
And we're interested in your firstborn. But go ahead.
Also, by the way, this applies no matter what you think. If you are, for example, a religious person who has watched the show for years here in Austin, and I don't care what kind of benefit you get out of it, whether you take glee in, pointing and laughing at how stupid we are, or if you actually just enjoy the discussion. All we want to know is if you're in Austin, you watch on cable, send us an email. Let us know, because we're making some decisions. Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff been going on. Oh, quick note to one of the presidential candidates, specifically Mitt Romney. It's really kind of strange to talk about how we support religious freedom and in the same breath claim that we are all children of the same God. Because my religious freedom encourages me to say, no, we're not. It's just kind of bizarre.
Yeah, maybe he believes that. We'll see.
They don't believe that.
They don't believe that?
They don't believe that.
Well, what a segue. Oh, my goodness.
There you go.
Well, that is the topic today. I'm going to talk about what they really believe and how we know that they don't believe what they claim to believe. So this is my 10th show on the theme of the failures of Christianity or the failures of religion. I won't go through all of them, but this is number 10. Today, they don't believe that. Well, Christianity is loaded with things that you're supposed to believe in: gods and souls and Holy Ghosts and resurrection and transubstantiation, prayer, second coming, and all this stuff. But a person's behavior tells you what they really believe, right? So, and a person's true beliefs, so what they really believe, is often at odds sometimes with what they profess to believe, right? They claim to believe one thing or the other. But if we look at somebody's actions, you often get a little different story. So, when the actions of a Christian leader or the flock are at odds with their professed beliefs, then they know at some level the religion is a fraud, or we know that they know, or there's some con going on here. And if they don't believe it, why should anybody? That's the punchline. It's like if they don't believe their own religion, why should anybody believe that religion? So that's what we're going to look at today, is situations where the behavior of religious leaders and their flocks are at odds with their professed beliefs. And like so many other areas, the integrity of their beliefs is at question, and we should count this among the failures, I think, of Christianity. Well, the first failure is people want to go meet Jesus. They want to go to heaven. They want to go meet Jesus and all this stuff, and they gush on it about all this, how wonderful it is, and they write songs about Mama's red shoes and all this good stuff, right? Which we're going to hear, I guess, when Christmas rolls around here pretty quick. But the fastest way to get to meet Jesus is not to sit in a church for 90 some odd years, right? The fastest way is to die, okay, supposedly, if you're a believer. But Christians rationalize their survival instinct by saying various ways, and they say, well, we're not gonna do this death thing because of whatever reason. And one reason is, well, they might say, well, suicide is a sin, but supposedly Jesus died for your sins and fixed all that, right? And even Martin Luther said, be a sinner and sin strongly, but more strongly have faith and rejoice in Jesus Christ. So if you really believe that stuff, that's not a good excuse. Or they might say, well, it's not your life to take, but Christians have persecuted and killed Jews for 1,400 years. It wasn't their lives. for them to take either. And they persecuted and killed people who they thought were witches for 400 years, and nobody ever brought that up. Anyway, so meeting Jesus. How about getting your kids to heaven? How about that? Well, similar sort of thing, except that the sin thing is a little different, right? And that maybe children don't have sin, or maybe they have all the original sin, and God's going to torture them all. But a lot of folks don't believe that God's such an ogre. All right, but maybe they believe instead that they get a free pass to heaven. Well, if that's true, then the best thing to do for your kids is to kill them, right? And that they have no chance of sin. They have no chance of reaching the age of reason where they have that risk. And this is the theological reasoning that Andrea Yates used when she killed her kids. Now, she was crazy, and we don't advocate anybody kill themselves or their kids, but let's put this out there. But yet Christians let their kids grow up and risk eternal torment, right? They might become gay, or they might, heaven forbid, become atheists, and then they'll go to hell. And so these parents clearly don't believe that they want to have their kids go to heaven. So what's the problem here? And if Christians did off all their kids, then who would fund the next generation of religious leaders, the ministers, and all that? Anyway, health, similar thing. Well, you always often hear that someone dies, that, oh, God took them up to heaven, and it's all part of God's plan. Well, if death is part of God's plan, then so is natural disease. And yet Christians go see doctors instead of praying, so they don't believe that, really. Even Mother Teresa went and saw a real doctor when she was sick, and they put some dressing on it and say, well, oh, Jesus, God took care of things, or I prayed to God and it fixed it, and we'll never give credit to the doctors and the medicine. And even faith healers don't visit hospitals. They go and have their big events, and they turn it on for a theater event, and they go and rob the desperate. So,
which is, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But that's a point not to be overlooked.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that is that if faith healers were genuinely healing people, instead of doing this in an environment where you bring in a bunch of people and you have no scientific information, you have no way of evaluating claims, you do this and people claim to be healed or appear to be healed, and then you take money, why haven't you marched your ass into the children's hospitals where we know that kids are sick and dying, and heal them? It would be on the national news. You'd be way richer.
Yeah. And if faith healing really worked, you could pray and have amputees cured, but that never seems to happen. And there's a great website called Why Doesn't God Heal Amputees? Why won't God heal amputees? Very good. So at least Christian scientists, I'll give them a little credit here, claim they attempt to be consistent in their beliefs, and that they don't actually go see doctors, and they do believe that disease is some sort of form of moral or sinning or supernatural issue. What about insurance? Well, if God is looking out for you and you are good with God, why do churches, if they're in this God business, need insurance? Why do they need protection from building codes? Why bother with building codes, right? Who needs safety when God's looking out for you? Why do you need lightning rods? And all churches have them in their steeples. Why do you need police protection? All these things. Well, they clearly don't believe that God's looking out for them if they're funding all these things and paying for all these things, right?
Not only that, the ones who are saying that this is all part of God's plan, they can believe that it's all part of God's plan, but they certainly aren't acting as if they actually believe that, because they're taking steps to try to prevent certain things.
Right.
But their steps to prevent things are also part of God's plan. See, it's all this. It's like
it's turtles all the way down.
Yeah. Hey, I love being able to iron a shirt. So I'm really happy that God inspired somebody to invent the clothing iron.
Right. Okay. How about money? How about spending money? Jesus says in Matthew 19:21, Jesus answered a question, if you want to be perfect, go sell all your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And in the Sermon on the Mount, there's quite a number of quotes that basically say, well, don't think about the future, just don't lay up your treasures on earth here. Give all that money away. Don't plan for tomorrow. Don't have a bank account. These sorts of things. And he wasn't talking about banks, of course. So I don't know how many Christians actually believe this, right? How many Christians don't have bank accounts? How many Christians actually give all their money away to the real poor? Ministers are not the poor, honest, really. If you go look at how they live and these sorts of things. So the churches are sort of using this to pry money out of the hands of believers, but believers aren't clearly believing all this, right? In the sense that they're not really giving up all their money, right? I don't know of anybody doing that unless they're ranting on a street corner and they need some mental health help. I don't know. So I don't know of many Christians who follow this. So that's another failure. How about marriage? Christians claim to have biblical justification for their heterosexual marriages, but the Bible promotes one man having multiple wives and even concubines, and a man owning his wives. So they're not only can't have property, they are property. So consider Solomon with all of his wives. That's certainly not the type of marriage that I think folks are claiming to promote. Or the story of Lot in Genesis 18 through 19, where he throws his married daughters out to the would-be rapists, and they throw them back, and then he later flees the city prior to its destruction and makes babies with both of them, and is later called a just and righteous man in 2 Peter 2, 7 through 8. Consider Abraham and his wife Sarah and his other wife Hagar. So a lot of confusion about marriage. Or it's a different animal than what folks seem to be advocating today. Prayer. I've done a whole show on the failure of prayer, but what about how you pray? In Matthew 6:5, Jesus said, "And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, so that they may be seen of men. Verily I say to you, they will have their reward," or they have their reward. So this, if you really are following Jesus, you're going to go into a closet and pray and not do this publicly. You're not going to have a government-led school prayer. You're not going to have prayer in city council meetings and these sorts of things. So,
speaking of which,
yeah,
quick notes.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, there was school board prayers going on, which was challenged. They've now decided that they're going to stop those because attempting to keep them going by legal means was going to be costly and they would lose. But also, with regard to public prayers and government-led school prayer and all these other things about the government, the Bible very clearly points out that God has appointed your leaders on earth, and that they are appointed by God, and you're supposed to do what they say.
Yeah.
And so clearly, they don't believe that.
They don't believe that, right. Well, it seems to me that when there's a Republican leader, and they believe that, but when there's a Democrat, he's an abomination to God and those sorts of things. And so they switch their rhetoric depending on who's elected at the time.
Yeah, and I don't even know that you can go down party lines anymore at all.
Yeah. Right.
I got crazy people in all parties everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I find it amusing that they're trying to elect a Mormon opposing a Christian, and the Christian voters are supposed to vote for the Mormons, and it's just very, very confusing. It's very amusing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and this gets into God's laws. It's like, okay, well, if Christian ministers certainly have a lot of ideas about how God wants you to live your life, and they want to sort of impose all this, but they don't seem to have the power in their own church to do this, to get their flocks to do what they want. So for example, Christian women have abortions at a rate similar to the population at large, and Christian marriages don't last as long as some other groups. I don't have those statistics at hand. Christians have gay kids despite all the religious mumbo-jumbo, and there's adultery and drinking and all this stuff that goes on, and all their flocks are just going every which way. And so who do they look to solve their problems? Well, they look to the government. So they want to get their their laws are the laws of our land. They want to put their abortion stuff and their stuff against gays in our laws because that's much more powerful than their God, and they're doing things that their God can't do.
One of the prime examples of this most recently is when we talk about issues like contraception.
Sure.
And the Catholic Church's position on contraception, even though the overwhelming majority of Catholic women practice contraception. So the church isn't very effective at getting their followers to stop doing this. So instead, they're going to say, well, this is our official position, and now we're going to go out and attempt to legislate it in order to force the people who are supposed to be following what we say to follow what we say.
Right. Which to me is an admission that their God can't do it.
Yeah.
And all their mumbo jumbo doesn't work. Okay.
And meanwhile, while I have absolutely no objection to drinking porn or strip clubs, the Christian normative position actually opposes those. Having been at strip clubs, a lot of Christians there, a lot of girls with cross necklaces on and nothing else.
That reminds me of in Washington, D.C., you can't be naked in a bar, but there are clubs where there's male go-go dancers and they wear socks. I find that amusing.
On their ears?
No, on their feet.
Oh, okay.
Not on their ears. Okay, one more. End times. There's a lot of preachers promoting this end time stuff, which I think of as snuff porn. You get to witness the Jesus torture all the non-believers from your front row seat in the clouds. A lot of folks are making money off this. Hal Lindsey, Tim LaHaye, John Hagee, Harold Camping. The whole Jehovah's Witnesses are playing this end time stuff. And my favorite quote from this is when Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:29 through 31 says, "But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remains that both they who have wives be though as not having," which means that they should be celibate, "and those who weep as though not weeping," and so on. So basically, he's telling folks you should be celibate because having babies is only going to complicate, the transition to the end times. And
not just having babies, though. Having any commitment other than that to Christ is problematic.
Yeah, but Christians clearly don't believe this because they value, making lots of babies, quiverfuls, and all that good stuff. They don't buy into this Paul stuff. Yet they are anxious about the end times and all that. So it's just
Paul's take on marriage was pretty much it's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. But if it keeps you from going out and sinning and having sex and stuff, then go ahead and get married. By all means, get yourself a legally registered person to have sex with,
That's right.
rather than sinning all the time. We just want to sin all the time.
Right. Okay. So to wrap up, Christian leaders and their flocks clearly don't believe the religion they're promoting. Their actions lead us to believe otherwise. They like to pick and choose from the Bible and use it as a weapon, these sorts of things. So if they don't believe it, then why should anybody? Okay.
They shouldn't.
They shouldn't.
I'm just saying, straight up, they shouldn't. And they don't. It's kind of, and I dealt with a lot of this when I was a Christian. You'd hear things like this from the pulpit about, this is what the Bible says you're supposed to be doing, and none of you people are doing it. You're out here all sinning. I've seen you going into the liquor stores and stuff.
So they get to turn the guilt screws and
yes.
make some money, right?
Yes. It is a guilt engine designed to keep the religion in business and to make money.
Yeah. From my perspective, it seems like it's completely set up to make everybody fail. Right, you're perpetually in a state of failure.
Yes, it sets up the normal human condition, normal human desires as undesirable and evil. Mm-hmm. There were ideas, we heard about this morning where, the best thing you can do is sin because otherwise Jesus died for nothing type thing.
Right.
But it's not so much that they don't believe what they say they believe. It's people are going to act in accordance with their beliefs. And when two beliefs come in conflict, one of them is going to override. And the belief that X is a sin and God doesn't want me to do it is frequently overridden by, I really want to do this. whether it's wrong or not. They'll do it knowing that it's
if you're
wrong.
Catholic, you can go confess later and
Yep.
ask forgiveness or whatever.
Or hope for deathbed forgiveness, or any number of things, or the once saved always saved. That's my favorite because I grew up in that tradition. So that maybe I'm still saved.
So then
I got
it doesn't
saved
matter
and
what
I
you
can do whatever I want because all my sins are always forgiven. But there's caveats in there about you'll know them by their works, and maybe you weren't truly saved. And
It seems like a little rat's maze where they're moving the cheese around.
Yeah. But with 1,000 denominations, I don't even know who to start asking.
Right.
How do I know
right.
which one of you guys?
Yeah, I get into
right?
trouble lumping all Christians together, but there's a lot of variation, and they can't all be right.
They can't all be wrong.
Yep. Let's take some calls. What do you think?
Absolutely. Sounds like a good idea. The phone number will be up on the screen as normal. Well, actually, lines are full. That's why the phone number's not up on the screen. Oh, shut up now. Okay. Leonard in Beaumont, Texas. How are you?
Okay, how are you?
Pretty good. I can't hear that, though, so we're going to need to get somebody to turn it up.
Okay,
You're fine, Leonard. Don't worry. What do you got for us?
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a problem with our studio speaker, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, I'm kind of new to all this atheist stuff. I'm from the South, a black man from the South, and it's like, it's kind of hard. I do have my questions and doubts about it. I don't know if I am or not. I think I am, mostly.
Okay. Well, do you believe
But,
in God?
I was just wondering this. I just wanted your opinion on something in the Bible. You remember in the Bible it says that Adam and Eve couldn't eat out of the tree of knowledge?
The tree of knowledge of good and evil, not just the tree of knowledge. But yeah, I remember it.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay.
So we got another problem.
Yeah, I remember the passage. It's about them being, the tree was the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah, and it was like forbidden for them to eat out of the tree of knowledge. It was like the only tree that they couldn't eat fruit from.
It's one of two, but yes.
Okay. Well, when they got the tree, they started getting smart or whatever.
They understood good and evil, yes.
Yeah, I mean, is it in your opinion, if it was part of God's design, that if God would have had His plan, that we really wasn't supposed to be intelligent?
It's not about raw intelligence. The tree wasn't the tree of knowledge. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was the prohibition from eating it has historically been represented as an intent to keep us innocent and pure.
Okay.
But
So
if
not about-
God were really smart, He would have put the tree outside the garden. If that's what He really wanted.
But yeah, it's basically a fairy tale trying to explain how evil entered the world.
Yeah, it's a just so story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Why do we have hardships? Why is life painful and hard and difficult? And that's what it's trying to answer.
If you try to read it to figure out what God's plan was and whether or not it makes sense, nothing but trouble lies down that road.
Yeah, I can't make much sense of the Bible either.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
You're our kind of person. Do you believe in a God?
And I'm not sure. I mean, I think the only reason why, if I do believe, is because that's how I was raised, and like in the back of my mind, this is how it's supposed to be. But like, if I don't know, it's like my intelligence tells me something's up.
Something's not right.
It's like,
Yeah.
If I think that when I ask a lot of questions and people just be like my peers, they just be like, it's dumb to believe that we came from nothing, and they be like, I refuse
Nobody's
to
asserting
believe
that.
we evolved from monkeys, and I'd be like, oh well, it's more easy to believe that we came from dirt and ribs, huh? It's just and then if we have to come from something, then where did God come from?
Exactly.
If everybody come from something.
You are our kind of people.
Leonard, you're going to be running the atheist community of Beaumont in 6 months.
Yeah.
I wish Well, I mean, I don't know where more people is like me, and every time I believe, I'm the type of person that when I believe in something, I do it strongly. And if I do believe in God, I don't think it's nothing to be playing with. And if I don't, I'm not going to act like I am just to get somebody else's satisfaction or just because everybody. I'm not going to go with the flow of everybody else.
Good for you.
Yep.
It's hard to have that courage, so I admire you for doing that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Leonard. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thank you.
Hopefully you keep thinking about him and get stuff sorted, and maybe start up.
Keep asking questions.
Definitely.
You're on the right track. Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. That's how it starts.
Yeah.
By the way.
Yeah.
For many people, not for everybody.
Little nagging doubts, and they get bigger and bigger, and it's like, what the heck?
Yeah. This stuff. Wait a minute. This stuff's just not making sense anymore.
The more you think about it, the less sense it makes.
And the thing that I probably should have recommended to Leonard was to get involved in skeptic groups and skeptic websites, but they give you the tools so that when you come across this and it's, hey, that doesn't quite smell correct. Mm-hmm. How do I assess that? Those groups can give you the tool set to actually figure out how to better evaluate claims.
Get your BS detector tuned up.
Speaking of evaluating claims, Mike in Billings, how are you?
Hey, I'm glad I fit in nicely to your transition.
If you're asking what it says you're asking, then it's perfect.
All right. So basically, this has to do with a specific caller that you had. It's probably been like 2 or 3 months ago now. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was you, Matt, and then a woman. I forget which woman it was. And a guy called in. It was a real strange call, but when he finally got to his point, he was basically just wanting to ask you about the cosmological argument. Mm-hmm. And when he did the first premise, I forget how he worded it, but I mean, it's basically everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Sure.
And you pressed them on that, but it seems like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so based on what you're saying, it seems like your position was that because he was making that claim, it was on him to prove that premise.
Yep. Here's the way it works. In a properly constructed logical argument, it's if we both agree on the premises and the argument is valid in structure, then that means we should agree on the conclusion. If we don't, then one of us is being inconsistent. And so the problem then comes if you've got a validly structured argument that we don't agree on the premises. And
so, but what? Oh.
And if we don't agree on the premises, then we need to sort that out first, because a logical argument that's validly constructed is such that true premises necessarily lead to true conclusions. Always, every time, no matter what, that's the deal with a valid logical argument.
But if the premises are false, you're off in the weeds.
If the premises are false, you don't know whether or not the conclusion is true. It might be true, it might not be true. It could be just happenstance and stuff. And so you have to either, one, agree, maybe for the sake of argument or maybe because you already agree, on the premises, or if there's a question about the premises, you have to spend time resolving that first, because everything else is a waste of time. If your first premise is that I can survive in outer space without any, equipment or aids, just me as a meat sack, I'm not going to accept that premise, because any argument you derive from it is a waste of time, because I don't know whether or not the conclusion we reach is true.
It's just the experience on our show is if we stop those things early, then we have better TV, and we don't get off into the weeds quite so far.
Yeah, right. And if you're making a positive claim, which is what you do when you state your premise, and your goal is to convince anybody, then you have the burden of proof. You have to convince the person. Otherwise, I don't even know what the point of conversation would be at that point.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you've said, but I guess like the slightly more nuanced is, I've always thought that you only needed to prove your premise, that your premise is more likely than its negation. So what's like that classic, Socrates was a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Sure.
So, you don't, there's a chance that Socrates was a woman. He could have been a woman masquerading as a man. Like, it's possible, but it only needs to be more likely than not. that Socrates was a man. Is that how it works?
No, because you can get into trouble there by accumulating a lot of error over many premises. So you could, if you want to start out saying, hey, I'm making a probabilistic argument and this outcome is more probable than this one, then that's fine. That's all above board and honest. But I don't believe that that's what we're trying for in a syllogism. We're trying for truth, and it's either one or the other, right? It's not probabilities or uncertainties.
There's two ways to assess it. One is that we accept both of the premises. We accept the premises. Don and I both accept these premises. The premises may not even necessarily be true, but the fact that we both accept them in a syllogism means that we should agree on the conclusion, because their truth is independent from the process of following the syllogism through. However, when I say that the premises are true, I should probably say that the premises are accepted. The criteria by which we go about determining whether or not a premise is true or acceptable, it could be the case that if you demonstrated that a premise was true, the truth of it is more likely than not, that I would go ahead and accept that premise and follow the argument through.
That would be a form of evidence. That wouldn't be a particularly strong form of evidence.
Yeah, well, I mean, the strength of the conclusion is dependent on the strength of the premises.
Yeah.
But
did you have a particular question with regard to the cosmological argument, or was this?
Yeah, but it's not specifically on the cosmological argument. It's just the way the first premise was assessed, because that's what really threw me, is that I specifically remember this kind of, you're holding your feet to the fire, you're kind of saying, well, how do you know that things don't come into existence without a cause? Well, we've never seen a universe created, so how do you know that? How do you know?
Yeah,
and he was like, I just
at the quantum level of physics, there are events that lack causes. And
yeah, but I know. Yeah, but see, I'm not getting into the. I mean, just the more the form of the argument. So, but my question is,
the explanation's really simple, and that is, I don't accept that it's true or probably true, and they have a burden of proof to demonstrate that if their goal is to convince me.
They have to demonstrate that it's more likely than not, or that it's absolutely true.
It depends. I mean, okay, when I say I believe something, that's not a statement that I think it's absolutely true or that it's been absolutely proved. It means that I am convinced that this is true or most probably true. If they could demonstrate that, if they could demonstrate their premise to the point where I believe it, then I'm on board with their argument. This is not a call for them to demonstrate an absolute truth or anything along those lines. It's about, I'm not going to accept their premise until I accept their premise. I realize that's a tautology, but the criteria may be separate from that.
So it's really just a pause to unpack that one claim.
Yeah.
And examine what that is and come to some sort of agreement somehow using a syllogism to support that complaint.
Yeah, you can use another one. Basically, that's the way we do everything. We find the point at which we agree, and we branch out from there. And so when somebody starts off an argument with something that I don't believe or don't agree with, I have to stop and challenge that right there, because anything else, if we continue, it's a waste of time. And the way in which they go about demonstrating or convincing me is going to vary with the type of claim.
And I agree. This is kind of weird because I'm always agreeing with you, but then see, like in this call, like you admit at the end of it, you were like, well, look, I'm not asserting either way, and you're saying it probably is true at the end of it. So it seems like you do believe that it's more likely than not that it's true.
In that particular example, there's a lot of little problems with language. It was probably a mistake to say that it's probably true, because what I was talking about is that I was going to spill water on the desk. What I was talking about is that it seems intuitively true, and that we have only examples going one direction. But that is insufficient for me to accept the premise that it is impossible. And that's what the premise is. The premise is that it is impossible for something to come from nothing. And that is something that not only do I not believe, I don't know how anybody could believe it, because there's no actual way to test that or demonstrate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, if at the end of that I said that it was probably true, which I probably did, and if I'm remembering correctly, it was Tracy and I that were on that show. It was about the way things intuitively present based on what we know, but we cannot make an absolute assertion about that, which is what the premise is, that it is impossible, not that it's more likely. If the premise was it's more likely for something to come from something,
I'm on board with that.
I'm kind of on board with that, except that I don't know how they determine more likely when you've
Right.
got
You've
to divide by zero error there at some point.
So, but, I mean, would you say, I mean, you don't have to state an opinion, but do you have an opinion? Like, if you were a gambling man and you had to guess, you don't know for certain, but I mean, would you say that things is it more likely than not that some things can begin to exist without a cause?
Oh, I think we're pretty much convinced that things can begin to exist without a cause, or at least in the way that we view causality, as Don was talking about. There are things in physics that, based on everything we understand about causality, don't have a cause. And so if we're going to talk in very vague terms like something and nothing, and in this case the caller was specifically eliminating the physics definition of nothing, saying you don't get to include that. And so instead he's talking about this absolute
scam.
Nihilistic nothing. So
okay, I'm with
that one.
yeah.
Okay, well, I'm with you. I'll let you move on. Can I just so I can look into something on my own? What would one of those things that you're referencing be?
Sure.
Just so I can...
Google Lawrence Krauss, A Universe from Nothing.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Cool. All right, we've got Gregg in Philly. How are you?
How are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I'm kind of a moderate Christian, somewhat deist. I agree with evolution and along those lines, but I also just don't understand why you guys set as your mindset to just go on and rail about the Bible. And although you make some valid, good points.
I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying.
You're breaking up a little bit.
All right, let me try to get to a better spot here. 1 second. Did you get the part about a little bit at least?
Yes.
Well, we heard you're kind of a moderate Christian deisty, but you don't understand something, and then it garbled.
Why you have to kind of mock the Bible like that, you know?
Oh, why do we mock the Bible?
Yeah.
Because it's ridiculous?
Yeah, I understand. Why is that important to you?
Oh, because I was a fundamentalist Christian for 20-some odd years, and came to the realization that my beliefs were entirely unjustified, and I see in the world around me a bunch of other people who hold these unjustified beliefs and who attempt to enact legislation upon others based on those beliefs, and I care about the truth and the people around me.
All right, I'm just trying to understand why it has to make a show about it, and why not just let people believe what they want to believe,
Because why should I just not...
Let's take just one quote, for example. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a quote in the Bible. That's a direct command from God. And hundreds of thousands of people have been killed for that quote. And it's reprehensible. It's horrible. And I can think of no good reason for it. And if a God really did write that, he's pretty fucking stupid for not saying, hey, by the way, there's no witches.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay? But what you asked, though, at the end was why not just let people believe what they want? I am. I'm engaged in, by the way, we don't make outgoing calls, and I don't go door to door to say, hey, have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? This is a program where we're discussing ideas, and by the way, the program's goal is not to just sit around and mock the Bible, although I could have that show, and I would enjoy it immensely.
Well, I do more than my share of that.
But the thing is, I have no problem with ridiculing something that is deserving of ridicule. But the primary reason for it is because this does real harm, and people, first of all, aren't necessarily just content to believe and not act on those beliefs. Those beliefs inform actions, and the actions have consequences to everybody. Nobody lives in a vacuum. And so, like I said, first of all, I care about the truth, and I also care about the people that I have to share space with. And so, first of all, we don't just sit around and mock, but yes, mockery is not something to be dismissed. I think it's a very valuable tool that exposes people. It's like the example that I used before was, and you can hide your young kids if you're watching the show now, is about Santa Claus, which is there are kids on the bus who are mocked for still believing in that thing that only little kids believe. And that, while yes, it can be a little bit mean, is what prompts some people or some kids to reconsider this. Others may find out on their own. They may stay up late on Christmas Eve and sneak around in closets. But for those who don't, mockery is a valid tool.
Yeah. And if we say anything false, by all means, challenge us. You know, call us out on it. Don't believe what we're saying. Don't believe what I'm saying.
I completely understand there's Old Testament. So I'm not trying to make excuses or anything. It's just like the New Testament is all that kind of somewhat good stuff. You know, there's the whole the family stuff. But
hey, Gregg.
Yeah.
First of all, you don't get an Old Testament or you don't get a New Testament without an Old Testament. Second of all, your Jesus claims to uphold the Old Testament. And third of all, the New Testament is worse. Because
how so?
Because the Old Testament, which would be the Jewish Bible, do you understand that Jews don't
the Torah,
and Jews don't really have the view on the afterlife that Christians do. As a matter of fact, they don't often really talk about what's going on because the Old Testament represents it as sleeping with their fathers, etc. But the New Testament makes people responsible for things that they didn't do. It has the doctrine of original sin, which I think is wholly immoral. It has the doctrine of substitutionary atonement, which is also something I think is moral. It introduces the concept of hell and eternal torment, at least under some people's version of it, which I also think is immoral. The Sermon on the Mount, which people often cite as one of the best things ever written and far beyond its time, is a mix of bits of good advice, bits of really bad advice, and bits of things that are so horribly wrong that they do nothing but create a victim mentality such that the bigger asshole you are for Christ, that you become persecuted, the more right with God you are. That's what it does.
Yeah, and, I was kind of in a similar thing that you said you were a fundamentalist. I was a Baptist and I was a Protestant. I'm kind of in this kind of deist thing right now. So, I'm not sure where I'm headed here, but I think, honestly, the more I watch your show, it helps me understand how things actually work.
Hey, Gregg, if I can be mildly self-promoting for a second, here's something for you to read, consider, and feel free to email me directly back on this. If you go to ironchariots.org, that is a counter-apologetics wiki that Russell and I put together and a lot of people contributed to, but there is an article there on the Sermon on the Mount that goes verse by verse through the Sermon on the Mount, telling you exactly what I think of each verse and why, and where I see problems and why we want to address those problems. Read that. Feel free to write me back and tell me what you think about that, because it's a really good way of pointing to something that people think is not only innocuous, but good and laudable, and showing that it's not what they think.
All right, I really appreciate it.
Sure, thanks, Gregg.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
I wondered if he had a bank account. Go ahead.
I missed it.
That's okay.
I still missed the joke.
Oh, about the Sermon on the Mount, not saving for the future. So it's that very thing.
No, I think
that's some of the bad advice.
Yeah.
Right? Don't save.
Yes.
God will take care of you.
That is definitely some of the bad advice in there. But my bigger objection, I don't think anybody follows that. But the part that people do follow is what I object to, which is this idea that the more persecuted I am, the more in line I am with what God wants me to do, because Satan is out here trying to make my life miserable.
Right.
And it encourages people to be bigger and bigger dicks for their God.
Well, it seems like it's an attempt to inoculate them against the outside influences, right?
Yeah, don't pay any attention to the criticism, because it's automatically invalid.
It's the devil, right?
As a matter of fact, the more criticism you get, the better you're doing. Which isn't necessarily false, but it does encourage a type of mindset that is very problematic.
Yeah.
There's a lot more there, though, in the New Testament as well. This battle between Paul and the disciples, and what version of Christianity was going to make it a piece of something. But I really am, my objections are on a core theological level. They are to the very principles that you can't get away from within Christianity. You can have all, there's lots of different versions of Christianity that take the bits and pieces and put them together in different ways and have the things they like and they don't like. And, there's even liberal Christian churches that are supporting of gay marriage and church-state separation. And these are good people who, I think, have come over to the right side of the issues, or at least we're in agreement. We're working towards the same goals, and yet they are stuck clinging to something for no good reason. And while they may recognize the damage that it does in other areas when misinterpreted, they haven't seen it all yet.
Yeah.
But I would be okay if religion, including Christianity, first of all, I'd like to get rid of it, but I want people to get rid of it voluntarily, for good reasons, not through legislation, not by making their religion illegal, and not by in any way beating them up to get rid of it. This is all about give it up on your own because the evidence convinced you.
Right,
That's it.
right, and that's what I'm doing with these topics. Is
Yep.
It's like let's look at it. Let's look at why it's failing, and if it really is failing, then why are you following it? Why are you believing in it?
I don't know. And when I was faced with that proposition, I did the only thing that I could do and maintain any intellectual integrity, which was give it up.
Give it up eventually, right?
Got it.
That's a process for a lot of folks.
Yep. Mike in New Orleans, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good.
That's good. So I wanted to challenge you guys on your definition of the word faith, actually.
Okay.
What is my definition of the word faith?
Well, as I understood it, and I've been a viewer for a few years, actually, and I really like your show, so to compliment you guys.
I changed my definition of the word faith. So
Did you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on early shows, I had a view of faith, and then later on I thought more about how it's actually used in conversation, what it means. I don't care too much about what dictionaries describe usage, but when I actually see it used, my later take on faith is that faith is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason.
Sure. I actually was going to describe your definition as holding a belief as truth without evidence, or indeed in the face of evidence.
Yeah, I think that's kind of fair. I don't know that I made a distinction that may not matter there to what you're talking about. Go ahead.
And I wanted to say that a lot of Christians might say that, but I think it's reductionist and idiosyncratic in the history of theology and religion. And I am an atheist, but if you think about the example of Abraham and Isaac, right? And if we put aside the ethics of the question, because that's a different conversation.
Okay.
The primary virtue that's supposed to be extolled there is the virtue of faith.
No.
Right. No?
The primary virtue of the Abraham story is obedience.
And fear.
Well, you can say that, but I mean, if you look at
No.
how...
It says that.
But go ahead.
if
Thou
you look at
fearest
how
me.
If you look at how theologians read the story...
I don't give a rat's ass how theologians read the story.
Well, it's important, right? This is an important...
Why?
Because we're talking about what the word means in the context of the history of the Christian tradition.
Well, I'm saying that I don't see the word in that story.
Well, okay, fair enough.
I'll look it up.
It's important though. That story in particular elucidates a very different conception of faith.
But that story doesn't talk about faith.
Yeah, there's not really doubt there. It's really more of a test of how much does he love his child versus how much does he love his God, right?
Well, that's exactly it. Right?
I don't think he ever doubts that the God exists in that story.
Well, no,
right?
he doesn't. That's my whole point. But if you read...
so I don't see faith coming into it so much.
But if you read, for instance, like Kierkegaard, his reading of the Abraham-Isaac story, right? The whole thing about it is that faith, what he means by faith here is that it's Abraham's ability to navigate the existential contradiction between his duty to God and his duty to Isaac with a decisiveness, right? Like, that quality is what Kierkegaard labels as faith.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't think
You could read it that way, but gosh,
and you know
that's
what?
working. That's working over time.
I have relatives who say that they don't call it religion, they call it faith. And so they're talking about it in yet another context. But if we're going to go around having a discussion about labels, you can't take one context, one usage, and use it against another usage when you're talking
Sure.
about two different things.
But what I'm saying is that the notion of faith as being support for a propositional claim, an ontological claim, an existence claim, like that is actually idiosyncratic and fairly new in the history of Christianity.
Which isn't remotely relevant because it's still true now and we're talking about now.
Sure, but I mean, it seems to me that there's a tragedy. Like, it seems to me that it does a disservice to the conversation.
It does a disservice to what conversation?
The conversation between, let's say, atheists and theists, right?
It reminds me of this
How is-
fact that the word prophet used to mean storyteller and not some sort of psychic. And,
How is it a disservice? How
so
is
the
it a
meaning of that has
disservice?
changed.
How is it a disservice to believers to actually address what many of them identify as faith in the modern language just because we've departed from what somebody else interprets the idea to have meant way back when? By the way, way back when wouldn't have included English or faith.
Well, sure, it would be Danish and
So,
Kierkegaard.
Mike, you think that we're talking past theists by using this definition? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think
That you think that theists have
I-
a different definition or a more nuanced definition?
I think a more nuanced definition. And I'm not saying all theists, right? Like, again, there is, like, that tradition of Christianity that I think that the definition that you give addresses. And I think that's clear. But I think it's reductionist.
Well, intentionally
to take,
so, perhaps, right? Because
First of all, I don't see that as a problem, but
I don't see that as a problem. You know, if you're going to trust in something that you don't have any evidence for, any real evidence for, then you're sort of off the rails already, as far as we're concerned.
Well, sure, but we do have, and I don't mean this in a conversation about, like, the existence of things, but in terms of, like, our existential experience, there are points where we don't have enough evidence, or we have evidence in contradictory positions, but we still have to act, right?
yeah,
Like-
we still have to act as a matter of practicality, but we're talking about what people believe.
Yes, but I mean,
I
again,
don't accept propositions on faith by the definition that I'm talking about. And when I'm talking about whether or not I'm going to accept a proposition on faith, another connotation of faith is irrelevant.
No, well, yeah, okay. The thing is, I agree with you insofar as we're talking about propositional claims.
Which is all I care about.
Well, the fact is, like, the whole discourse surrounding the word faith, like, in some ways, the transposing the faith into propositional language is, like, that's something that, like, Pat Robertson might do, you know? It's not something that, like, that's a part of, like, there's a whole other side to the history of Christianity and even Christianity now that would consider faith as an existential question.
And you'll have to excuse me, but I'm getting bored, and why would I give a rat's ass? This is what apologists do. We're talking about the usage that apologists use. I don't care about some nuanced theological position with an alternative usage of a word, because now we're not even engaged in a semantic argument, which is useful because semantics is about what words mean, but now we're just talking about two different things and arguing over whether or not a label should apply to them both or one or the other. And I'm not interested in that. Let's call things what they are.
Yeah, no, I agree with this, but again, like, you can't generalize all of Christianity by the stupidest among them.
Of course. Of
Right.
course. And we don't.
I feel like, again, I mean, maybe I'm just talking in circles at this point, but to define the word faith as a position that has some relation to evidence is doing that. It's defining a religious term.
Well, maybe so.
No. Faith is not just a religious term. It's a word. And I'm using it in a specific context, and I'm defining that context, and there's nothing invalid about that. Don't give words away to the religious.
No, I was going to say something similar. That is, if people don't like that definition, they're welcome to call back and say, "Hey, but you're missing this whole aspect of it, and let's give it a name, or let's talk about it as a separate thing, and let's make the dialogue go forward." And that's perfectly valid response. And we're not getting that.
We could have had this entire conversation and substitute the word God.
Well, you could have, but I mean, you would have. That's actually much more difficult, because the word God, it's not idiosyncratic to say that the word God is a supernatural entity that's personal and blah blah blah. It is idiosyncratic.
It is to
some people,
it
but
is
it's not
to panentheists.
It's not idiosyncratic to the discourse of Christianity as it's historically manifested itself, right? It is idiosyncratic to use the term faith in this way.
No. I don't agree.
Okay. I mean, okay.
I just don't. It reminds me a lot of the people who are saying, yes, but when I talk about faith, I'm talking about my faith, and I use it this way. That's fine. Say whatever you want. But it doesn't change the fact that there are people currently in the world talking about their beliefs and justifying it on faith. And when we analyze what they mean by faith, it is vacuous. It is the acceptance of propositions without evidence or in the face of evidence. That is how it is used. Now, the fact that it may be used differently elsewhere is neither here nor there. And I'm not painting everybody with the same brush, by the way. Every time I talk about something, if somebody doesn't fit into the way I have described it, then I wasn't talking about them. And I apologize, but we are completely out of time. They put the credits up. Thanks so much for calling, and to the other callers, and Don for talking about they don't believe that.
They don't believe that?
They don't believe that. There's the people who work on the actual show and the theme songs and all that stuff. We'll see.